Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for this panel on preparing your engineering team for organizational growth. This is a LeadDev webinar created in partnership with Jellyfish. The webinar will last about 45 minutes, and then after that, the panelists and I will head over to the LeadDev Slack and we'll answer any of your remaining questions in the scaling channel. If you do have questions during the panel, feel free to submit them through the Q&A. And if they're kind of very relevant to our current conversation, then I'll integrate them. Otherwise, we'll get to them towards the end or in the channel. So before we get into introductions, I just want to acknowledge that the description for the panel is very much like, your company's doing great, you're growing, like, how do you navigate that? And, we were kind of at an interesting time where many companies may not be in that state, but I still think this panel is super relevant, whether your company is, kind of business as usual, going through, hiring growth or layoffs or just your standard tech company reorgs that seem to happen all the time. It's relevant for all companies. So just wanted to give that disclaimer. And so let's jump into intros. So for the panelists, maybe just introduce yourself and then share something that in your experience maybe worked well for a team size of, X, but not at a larger team size of Y, or I guess it could be smaller as well. Tessa, you want to start us off?
Sure. Thank you, Jean. Well, and I'm so excited to be here. So thanks also to LeadDev for putting this together and for having us. Let's see. So my name is Tessa. I am a Senior Director of Engineering at Condé Nast, where I oversee the brand engineering teams for many of the brands in the portfolio. So including Wired, The New Yorker, Vanity Fair, I won't list them all, but and many more. Let's see. So something that works at one team size, but not another team size. So when I joined the company, I joined as the Director of Engineering for The New Yorker, which was a really interesting time in their growth. They had a pretty small team of about 4 engineers who were full-time, and my job was to grow that team. Well, first of all, figure out how big to grow that team and then grow it. It ended up being from about 4 to about 25 within about a year, and changing the geographical footprint from New York to New York, London, and Bangalore. So lots of change in a very short period of time. I'm very excited to be here to chat about it. But one of the things that I think works really well on a small team, or can work well on a small team, but not so much on a bigger team, is when you have a really small group of people, your ways of working and your norms are probably really implicit. So people just kind of know things. They kind of know how, maybe that's what time to come to an office if you're in an office. Maybe that's how to open a pull request. Maybe that's what's expected from, comments on a pull request. And that can work in a small team, but that doesn't scale. I would actually also argue that implicit norms are good to be made explicit at any team size because they make your team more accessible. So if somebody joins your team, especially somebody who may be from an underrepresented group, the more they have to kind of figure out, the more cognitive load they'll have. And the more that you have really taken the time to be intentional about and written down, the easier it is for somebody to come into your team. So that's something that I think works at all team sizes, but really you need when you start to get to a bigger team.
Great. Thanks, Tessa. Airly, you want to introduce yourself and share something that works but then doesn't work?
Sure. Hi. Also, thanks for having me here. I'm happy to partner with LeadDev, and thank you all for joining today. So I'm Airly McSweeney. I am the Director of Engineering for Front-End Enablement at Etsy. I love very much that we have an enablement layer within the company now. I've been in leadership at Etsy for over 6 years. During which time I've been doing a lot of transformative product enabling work. I consider myself to be driven by curiosity, and I really love the mission of the company, which is to keep commerce human. I have moved into engineering fully from a background in quality assurance and test engineering. And I also love to be and continue to be a passionate advocate for diversity, equity, and inclusion. I like to tackle complex problems. I like enabling people. I like helping people to grow their careers. And I just feel great that I get to do that. And that's the end that I get to share some of that with you all today. In terms of something that works well for a team size, let's see. I think for small teams, there's always this maybe duality, if you will, in terms of roles. When I think of a small team with like 3 engineers and an engineering manager, I often find, and I've experienced it myself, that the engineering manager tends to play a bunch of different roles. They're the ad hoc PM, they're the ad hoc communication specialist, they're sometimes filling in as a tech lead, maybe sometimes they're even still writing code. And as the team size grows, there's more of an expectation, more of a necessity to really streamline and clarify, because at a larger team size, it's important to do all of those things well versus one person trying to do the bare minimum in all of these roles. So I would say that's my one example of something that doesn't work well between a small team and a larger, more established team.
Thanks, Harley. Let's go to Kyle.
Good morning. Thanks for having me. This is a cool way to start my morning on a nice Tuesday. My name is Kyle Denholtz. I'm Director of Engineering at Ngrok. We're a fun developer tool. Online and one line, I think, is our new slogan. I really like that. I have a lot of experience the last 5 or so years of starting from groups of individuals, really small startups, to then introducing first managers, product managers, all that kind of new process. So a lot of the dimensions, I think, along the lines of are kind of like when you introduce your first big new thing or your first kind of big structural changes on teams. So one of the things I've seen, Tessa was mentioning taking implicit to explicit sort of expectations and ways of doing things. I've seen a lot of that, writing things down for the first time. A lot of that revolves around trust is what I've seen. And so how do you build trust in an organization? We've experimented with things that have worked really well, like introspection hours. So getting people to open up about their personal lives a little bit. I think especially over the last couple of years, everybody, work was a focus for a lot of people just because that's where you were seeing people for the most part. I think building that trust is something that you could do really easily in a group of 5 to 10 engineers. And then as you get to 15 and then start breaking into teams, it could be really tough. So you have to find new ways to build that trust, both within the team and between the teams.
Thanks, Kyle. And Jim?
Hi, I'm Jim. I am a director of engineering at Jellyfish. And actually today is my first Jellyversary. So I've been with the company for a year at this point, and I've been very excited to be here. Over the past year, we've tripled in size, both in terms of our number of customers and our team size as well. So we are really living the growth story. And I've also been very happy to have had the opportunity this past year to work on a product that I believe in an awful lot. Jellyfish is helping engineering leaders tell the story of engineering and make better sense about what their organizations are doing. So it's just been great to have the opportunity to build something where, in some sense, I'm kind of the target customer for the product. In terms of things that I've seen work well at a small scale and not scale up. This one is probably a little obvious, but it's one that I see teams get trapped by. And it's when you start out and you have a small team, where you're kind of all fitting in a room, the general way that you engage with supporting operations and product is for everyone to be all in on it. Like everyone is there, doing the thing. But as you scale up and get to more teams, what's going to happen is either things will fall through the cracks because people are assuming someone else has got it, or everyone's all in on it. And as a result, you kind of get into this trap of, the team thrashing and getting knocked off of their focus. And there's actually even a second order impact of this is that when you're small and everyone's doing the thing, you're probably not investing as much as you should in the infrastructure around how it is you monitor and alert. So to get to where you need to be when you have those teams, not only is it a matter of investing in sort of new processes and new ways of engaging with the issues that are coming out of production, but also investing in the infrastructure that enables that across your teams.
Great, thanks, Jim. I'll share a little bit about myself as well. Jean, I'm the VP of Engineering at Range, where we build better communication tools for remote teams mostly. And before that, I was doing some leadership development and coaching for engineering leaders. And then before that, I was at Medium for a little over 5 years, growing that team from 5 total to like 60 plus engineers and 150 plus employees. Mine is very similar to others, kind of like making things explicit and also just like not just being able to get everyone in a room and having everything be relevant. So one thing I've seen is like, 7 plus or minus 2 is like the standard team size. But once you get, to like 10, 12, then you're looking at stand-ups where people just like, they're just not, the information is just not useful and people just kind of tune it out and they miss the important information as well. And so just in those situations, being aware of like, okay, when should we kind of split the team or figure out like, how do we get status updates in a way where people can kind of get the relevant information they need, which is a lot of what Range does as well. So making sure that people are spending their time in meetings effectively and not just listening to things that are not relevant. All right, thanks for all the intros, everyone. So kind of let's take a step back. I think a lot of the conversations, I'm sure many of you panelists and also the audience are having is like, the economy is changing. How do you how do we change our plans to adapt to what's going on? So like, how do you decide how much to hire? Do we kind of continue as usual, or do we kind of scale back our growth plans? So mainly like, how do you decide how much to hire and who to hire? And Tessa, you had some thoughts about this.
Sure, thank you. So when we were putting together the plan for the New Yorker hiring proposal, I sort of took a step back and said, what is the big picture? Like, what is the total readership in this case for the New Yorker? If we had every person in the world who would want to read this magazine, what does that number look like? What does a total subscriber number look like? That could be anything. That could be, addressable audience. That could be market cap, whatever it is that's relevant for your business. But I wanted a picture of, what is the end state? Because I don't think that more is better. I think that, I wanted to make sure that if we were going to hire and grow, we were going to do it really intentionally and we weren't going to overhire. Sort of to your point, Jean, about, what do you do if you find yourself in a situation where perhaps you have overhired? That's really uncomfortable. And so I wanted to be really intentional about not getting there and making sure that we were hiring not too many people just for the sake of it. So then sort of took a step back, worked really, really closely with the product lead and looked at sort of specifics of what are the areas where he wanted to focus, what are the specific projects that he had in mind over the next year or two. And then took a step beyond that and looked at what is the technical landscape, what are the technologies in the company, what are the technical expertises that we might need. And then because Condé Nast is a bigger portfolio company, I also looked at what the other teams were across the company. What are the platform teams? How much do they do? How much do they not do? So how much do I actually have to staff this individual team and how much is going to be handled by somebody else? And so that was sort of the process to arrive at a total number. The next step and some sense of, technical expertise of I need X number of maybe front-end engineers, X number of back-end engineers. I would love somebody who, maybe has done something in the subscription space before, things like that. My next step was, okay, I have this total number, and how do we organize? And in this case, it was about 25. So I can't remember who said this, but somebody already made the great point of, team size plus or minus 7. So 25 is not a team. 25 is way too many people for one team. So how do we organize? And again, sort of took a step back and said, we could organize in a lot of different ways. We could say we have a front end team and a back end team. We could say that, we're going to align around missions and say this person is only, or this team is only focused on subscription growth. This team is only focused on, the article experience, something like that. And so in order to decide ultimately on how we were going to organize the teams, we came up with sort of guiding principles. And so whatever the team structure ended up being, we wanted to make sure that the teams were able to collaborate, but also that they had autonomy. So they weren't stepping on each other's toes, but they weren't in silos, which are sort of in conflict, but intentionally we wanted there to be that tension. And then we also decided that we wanted there to be continuity. So we didn't want people to be moving projects every 5 minutes, but we also wanted there to be flexibility. So we didn't want somebody to feel like they were stuck on a particular team and didn't have any room to be able to grow. And so from that, we were able to arrive both at the number, the skill set, and the team structure that we ultimately rolled out, which ended up looking like 5 teams, iOS, Android, and 3 web teams focusing on different areas.
Sounds like a very intentional process. And it seems like some companies are just like, oh yeah, we're always hiring, we're always taking good engineers, and it's kind of like get them in the door and then figure out what to do with them. But it sounds like you're kind of starting from a very like, okay, what's the kind of like what does this person, like what's their skill set, what's their skill level, and like working backwards from like, what do you want the end state to be? Just much more intentional. Any other, for other folks, any differences or kind of similarities in how you've thought about growth plans?
I love a lot of what Tessa was saying about just kind of listing out all the upward and downward pressures that kind of like push you in certain directions. I find listing those out really helps and being explicit about them. And then also like, I think you're kind of getting this, thinking about the timeline of those hires, like all those people don't show up on the first day. And so I've really found it helpful to list out in quarters or months or whatever kind of like your planning cycle is. Like, what do the team shapes look like 3 months from now after we've hired these people, 6 months? And of course, your hiring plans are going to change along the way, but it goes a long ways to think about how do the team shapes change and how do the folks you have now fit in there? Like, do some of them grow into leaders over the next 12 months? And like, they can take that manager position. And then you have to remember to backfill them, of course. But like, yeah, I think like charting out the timeline has been really useful for me as well.
Mm-hmm. Cool. So, we're talking about kind of how do you prepare your engineering team for these times of growth or change? What are some, Ariely, maybe you can start us off with like, what are some common challenges you've seen engineering teams face during these times? And like, what have you, like processes or structures that have been put in place to kind of help the team adapt to these challenges?
Great question. And thank you for that, Jean. There's so many ways to answer this question, but when I think about this, I really reflect on kind of complexity of whatever infrastructure or software the team is maintaining, kind of growing over time. And as well as the team grows, things like tech debt, things like a lack of code ownership, right? They can introduce challenges such as like issues with knowledge distribution on the team. One person having all the information about this specific feature, another person having all the expertise on another, and tracking and managing all of that can become challenging. So when I think about things like tech debt growing and the lack of code ownership, they're essentially like 2 partners in crime, if you will. But when it comes to managing complexity along with growth of the team and growth of the engineering organization overall, it also necessitates more clarity, and that can mean further clarifying roles within or roles that support the group and their goals. And in my view, in my experience, it just became very clear when my group needed support from a product partner. And then we went out and we advocated for that. And the specific challenge that we were navigating was that as an enablement function, we were doing all of this great work in terms of infrastructure work to enable product development, but it felt like the group on the product side wasn't aware, or we were not communicating in a language that they understood. And so we needed to bridge that gap and further clarify our goals and our intentions to a different audience. And so I would say the emerging issue there is managing complexity. And what can happen with complexity is that you need to further clarify roles, and you need to understand what goals you want to achieve so that you can bring the right person in or the right people in to bridge that gap.
Yeah, as teams grow, you definitely, the teams themselves can become more siloed. And so like you can't just turn to the person next to you and have a shared understanding of like what's needed between your teams, like someone, you haven't even seen, which is, I think, even more challenging working remote as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Any other common challenges, Jim?
Yeah, I think so. One thing that we've heard, from our customers and leaders in industry that we speak to, and the thing we wrote about in our 2022 report was that almost half of the leaders that we've spoken to are very interested in making sure that the priorities of the organization are the things that are their teams are focused on. But as you're changing the org, there's a lot of things coming at engineering teams that might actually impede their ability to dedicate their time to roadmap issues. And to the extent that you can be intentional about either investing in tools that help you see what teams are working on, or really just focusing in on that, you can move the needle, so to speak, on getting teams to figure out what's taking up their time that maybe doesn't need to be on the roadmap and push it off. So what we found is that folks who invest in that are actually spending about 29% more of their time on roadmap just by getting visibility. And in our company, we've been able to use our own tools to understand better the extent to which people are investing in like KTLO type activities, so keeping the lights on, and then understand how we can actually go in and find ways to deal with that work differently. Either it's through investment in infrastructure, or recognizing that it's not important to focus on at this time, so that teams can sort of refocus on the product features that are helping us like move our product forward and make new sales.
I think one thing that happens is, well, I spent a few years training engineers and engineering leaders, and I feel like one thing that engineers are quite resistant to is the idea of like marketing or selling their work, or feeling like they need to self-promote what their team's working on or what they're working on. And I think a lot of what Airly and Jim are speaking to is like the need for, tools and structures to help kind of, I guess, create some more visibility for what teams are working on, what's going on. I'm curious, for any of you, have you encountered that resistance with specific engineers? And like, what have you found useful to help them kind of shift their mindset to a place where, they're like, oh yeah, that is part of my job, is to like kind of communicate externally and manage up and kind of manage that visibility?
I can speak to that a little bit. I think that's one place where a career ladder can be really helpful. Either you're within the company or borrow somebody else's. I know Etsy, I think, has a really good career ladder that y'all have published. And really make it a part of somebody's professional development, and say, being a senior engineer is not writing the best code. Being a senior engineer is, yes, writing good code, but also exhibiting other leadership qualities, especially if you have an IC track, especially if you have lead engineers or principal engineers. That's a leadership role, even if it's not a people management role. And so leadership looks like communication. It looks like, being able to talk about the work and not just sort of do the work quietly, and being able to coordinate with your team. So sort of tying it back to career growth, I've found to be a really effective tool to get individual people to see the value of that type of work.
Yeah, the IC track at the higher rungs is not actually IC work, right?
Exactly.
Making that clear.
Absolutely. Plus one, what you said, Tessa. If I were to maybe jump in, I would just add that how we think about, bringing work and making it visible. We rely heavily on our OKR process, honestly, and we invest heavily in like having that flow to a certain rhythm so that everyone in the company actually knows what's going on.
Kyle, anything to add around like team processes and structure changes that you found you needed to add in to kind of help the team adapt?
Oh man, I've joined a lot of teams that have in the process lately for the last 4 years. Yeah, I think that like helping people, sort of selling it to the team as like, this is going to help you free up other time as we add more people to the organization. Like it's going to improve. I found a lot of traction with the kind of like spoke and like hub type metaphors about, we need communication hubs and we need to create API boundaries with teams so that it's effective communication, not just you now have to maintain relationships with 20 people instead of 10. So I think like introducing any kind of like first step processes, I found like trying to introduce something like sprints or Scrum wholesale tends to not work great when it hasn't been there before. So like starting with the smallest thing possible, we're just going to actually start filing issues for, not to like do tons of paperwork, but just understand and communicate with like our first product manager. What are you doing over the next month? Do you expect that to even be done? You don't even have to give it points on there. And maybe we get to doing points at some point, but just, communicating like, do we think this is done this month? Because they're going to have to send out a blog post and we don't want them to waste time writing that blog post or something. So I think like, talking with the team in terms of, a lot of this process that we're adding is about communicating with all the people that we're adding, making them more effective and making you more effective as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I'll add on here that I found that whenever I introduce processes to teams, that's also something that sometimes people are resistant to. So saying that it's actually really embracing the idea of it being an experiment. Kate Houston wrote something for LeadDev on kind of always framing it as an experiment and then making sure it has a time period and then you debrief on how it went can be very helpful. Because I imagine as the things are changing all around an engineer, like the idea of like, okay, now we're going to do this forever. Now you're going to be on this team forever. Like that's pretty daunting. So just kind of embracing that like more dynamic experimental approach can be helpful.
100% putting it.
Yeah.
Really nice.
Yeah. Cool. So it sounds like in a lot of the growth that you all have experienced, a lot of it is adding in roles. So whether that's product management, kind of creating an architect role, I think that is often challenging because you're hiring in people who are new to the team, maybe haven't quite gained the respect and trust of everyone on the team yet, and often in like fairly senior roles. I'm wondering if there's any sort of like how to introduce and integrate these roles, but also the specific people in the roles and then what to watch out for. I know, Ariely, you've done a bunch of work on this at Etsy. Maybe you could start us off.
Sure, happy to weigh in on this. I love this topic. I would say maybe over the past year, maybe past 18 months, we did dig in and invest heavily in the front-end architect role here at Etsy. And I think one of the signals that we were really responding to was that there's this it's obvious there's this intersection of like what's going on with your front end, what's happening right underneath that front end, as well as that like overarching business goal, and how do all of these things come together from a technical standpoint. And what we realized was that we had grown our teams sufficiently. We felt like we understood the importance of each team's work, but we felt like we didn't know what the direction was for all of the work happening on those teams. What was the final destination? And when we looked at that gap, there was definitely room there for an architect to come in and lead the effort to create what that North Star was going to be. Essentially, we wanted to make some investments in infrastructure and long-term frameworks, but we wanted to have a picture of what that investment looked like so that we could sell it to engineering leadership so that they could buy into it, so that our executive team could buy into it. And that's really where the need, for example, for an architect came in. And it was an interesting experience because we hadn't done it outside of the systems architects group before at Etsy. And so we spent a lot of time prioritizing alignment with key stakeholders, making sure everybody understood what this role was going to do and how it could strategically impact our business. So overall, it's still an in progress thing, but it's going very, very, very well. So well to the point that we also decided to add a web performance architect. So if I were to sum it all up, I would say, if you feel like your teams are sufficiently grown and you feel like they are working well and they understand the work and the value that they're contributing, but you can't, if you find yourself not being able to answer questions about where you're going to be in the next few years, I feel like that's a great signal in terms of adding an architect to the team.
Ariely, can I ask you a question about that? I'm interested in knowing, like, in a lot of the engineering teams people are trying to build, we're trying to get high agency teams where engineers feel empowered to make decisions. Oftentimes, if you put an architect into an organization, that role, like in a bad version of it, kind of turns into gatekeeping about technical direction and what can be done, what can't be done, and can be viewed by engineers as kind of a disempowering function within the org. Like, how did you work through that? Or did you hear any worries from your engineers that, hey, like, what's this person? Are they going to be telling me what to do from now on? And if you heard that, how did you work through that?
That's a great question. I think that, so we didn't experience that, and there's a reason for it. I did prioritize getting a lot of people on the same page, a lot of people like VPs, a lot of people like our CTO, in terms of understanding what this role would be, what they would contribute, and what they could expect to see from this role down the line. I think, Tessa, you call that we do have a pretty solidified IC career path as well. So all of those factors, all of that effort to create that alignment really paved the way for a friction-free, seamless entry of the front-end architect role.
In general, for introducing these like more senior, well, I mean, it's very different from hiring like a, kind of early career engineer, right? You're bringing in someone whose role is specifically to product manage or set technical direction. Any tips for how to kind of integrate individuals into the team and kind of gain the respect and trust of the teams that they're joining?
Is that a question for me?
If you, go for it.
Sure.
If you have,
Well, I can share a little bit about what worked well for us at Etsy. So I think we are all on the same page now. We think of the architect role as a very senior role, but also an individual contributor role. And so when we thought about that seniority, when we thought about kind of their remit and their scope, we did decide that the best thing, or the thing that we wanted to experiment with and try first, is to have that person report into a director, so that they don't report into like someone who's maybe managing a team on the front lines. That does affect someone in this role's ability to navigate the organization at the level we're investing in them at. So if an architect is a very senior person, we want them to feel that they can reach out to another director or another architect in a different group who's reporting to a director, or even a VP. So we did do a lot of thinking about that, and it helped inform how we introduced the role, like that, even how we communicated about the role as well.
Yeah. Jim, any additional thoughts here on introducing new roles?
I think there's probably an upfront sort of top of hiring funnel thing we should consider too. And that's making sure that as you talk to people who are going to be in these new roles, that they, exhibit the right kinds of cultural and value alignment for how you want your engineering organization to function. So, if, like, for instance, you're talking to a PM and, they're kind of viewing their role as, hey, I'm here to explain the why of what we're doing, and I'm here to facilitate the work of the engineering team, as opposed to, oh yeah, I'm going to write all the stories and the acceptance criteria, and this is exactly what I want the engineers to deliver. Then you've got two different styles of work, and you need to make sure you've chosen the right style for your team. I mean, for us, we're looking for people who are very much on the side of, we want to facilitate the engineers' work. We want them to understand why they're doing what they're doing, what the big picture and the benefit it is, and enable them to make the right decisions, sort of like shifting left, like very extremely.
Great. So as teams grow and change, as engineering leaders, right, your role also shifts and changes as well alongside the companies. I'm curious, as engineering leaders, how have you found, or like, what have you found effective to scale your own impact as the company grows, and like help other engineers level up and help yourself level up as well? Tessa?
Sure. So I heard this, and I wish I could attribute it correctly, but I heard this in a talk years ago where somebody said something to the effect of, give away your job because you can't get the next job if you're still doing your current job. And I loved that advice. And I think it really makes a ton of sense. So if you're looking to grow in the organization, you have to give away parts of what you're doing. And so hopefully you have leaders that you're sort of bringing up under you that you can sort of give stretch opportunities to take on a piece of your work or a project or a new opportunity. This can be at any level of management. So as an individual team manager, I would put one of the engineers in charge of a summer intern as an example, somebody who wanted to move into management. That looks different now, where maybe I'll give away an entire project or I'll give away an entire sort of like, architectural rethink or something like that to somebody else. But I think that really it opens you up to be able to then think at the next level of strategy, which is where you really want to be. And in terms of the how, I like to do something called paving the way behind me, where documentation is not just for code, it's for everything that we do. So where I can, I write down what I'm doing. I'll give myself run books. I'll give myself, spreadsheet after spreadsheet of keeping track of things. And it's actually, I've had sort of absorbed the orgs of 2 other managers in the last year. And they just shared their Google Drives with me as a way of, and we had meetings as well. But it was great because it's great to be able to have those artifacts, that people were using day to day to sort of navigate. And I can go back to them and refer to them if that's like, I want to go back and read somebody's, performance review or management notes or team structure plan from a year ago or whatever it is, to be able to have those artifacts, I think is really, really helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. I've also heard this as like giving away your Legos, like giving away your job feels a little bit larger, but I guess maybe giving away pieces of it is the Lego analogy.
Oh, that's Lara Hogan. That's the attribution.
Yeah.
I love it.
Kyle, anything you found useful? Any mindsets or specific things you've done to kind of scale your own impact?
Yeah, I think earlier, Jane, you were mentioning something about retrospectives, like at the team level and like reflecting on things. I have to have regular reminders to do that kind of thing, but that's been really effective for me in terms of finding like places where I can give something up. I do like a quarterly time audit, and I just look at my calendar, the sort of the record of like, where was I spending my time? I find that's usually a really telling place for, do I really need to be there anymore? Like, am I adding value to that meeting? I think is a question that I ask myself a lot. And then lately I've been thinking also about like the RACI matrix of kind of, am I responsible for this? Am I accountable for this? Am I consulting, or should I just be informed about this? And definitely when I get to the territory of I should only be informed about this kind of thing, I just ask for meeting minutes or like a debrief or something once a month. And that also really helps empower people to see that you're willing to step away from something. And you want to be careful not to just totally abdicate any responsibility or level of interaction there. But I find that just, am I being effective or helpful there? Or can I step back from that activity or meeting? It goes a really long ways. And I have to regularly remind myself to do that. So I do it every quarter.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I found that like, I remember being in like early stage, kind of seed stage startup, and I still am, but like as an engineer, like I see and seeing gaps in the process and being like, wow, no one's doing anything. I could do something. And like feeling that motivation to like jump in and help out. And so as a leader, I think it is, one intentional strategy is to like kind of leave those gaps if they're not like urgent, right? But like kind of leave some holes for people to kind of step into and have them have that experience of like feeling like they're not just, getting something on an Asana or Jira ticket that's already been scoped out and already done before by people who know better, that they can kind of do whatever makes sense. And that's like pretty good enough for that stage of the company. We are down to about 6 minutes. So if anyone who is watching has any questions, feel free to drop them in the Q&A and we'll kind of continue. But if any questions come up here, we'll also try to cover those as well. I guess some of the challenges I'd say of growth is I've always thought of kind of company and growth and personal growth as like finding the right fit where like you're kind of growing alongside the company is important. And sometimes that means, finding a slower growing company. It doesn't always mean like getting on the rocket ship. Sometimes it does if you have the kind of capacity to take on a faster growing company. But I'm curious how you think about like how do you personally handle that transition, right? Like you're kind of, as an engineering leader, you're both navigating this transition of the company changing around you. You're helping support engineers and other engineering leaders who are also coping with this transition and trying to navigate it. But any like, I guess, any tactical tips for like how to take care of yourself, how to support yourself as all this stuff is happening so that you can take care of your team as well? Well, Kyle, you're unmuted, so maybe you have some thoughts.
I feel like starting with self-care is really important. Again, I need mechanisms for doing things. So I actually have a list that I check in with almost every day. Like, did I walk my dog yesterday? Did I drink enough water? And sometimes, especially when things get really hectic, like just having that list to go back and refer to and keeping yourself accountable to that goes a really long ways. And then when you start the workday, you know that you've been taking care of yourself, and that comes through in how you show up, I think, a lot of the time. So, and then over time, you could even kind of, if you want to, you can level up that list. But I think just having something concrete and keeping yourself accountable to, am I taking care of myself, goes so far for taking care of your people.
Yeah. It also models to the people who are watching you that you can take that time for yourself, right? Like I look at my co-founder, not my co-founder, but the co-founder of Range, and she's like, yeah, you should take time off. You don't, like, just because you had an unproductive week doesn't mean you can't take Friday off. Like you don't need to like earn your rest, right? And so she'll tell me things like that. And then that makes it easy for me to do that myself. And then also, people who work with me see that I'm doing that. And so it trickles down, even though it's hard to take that advice personally, even though it's easy to give it to engineers that work with you. Jim, were you going to add something?
Actually, you hit the point that I was going to add.
The modeling.
Yeah. Plus one on that. I think people take their signal from leaders. And so if you're sending Slack messages at midnight, people are going to say, oh, that's how it is here. And it's just a bad message. Right.
Even if your intention is good and you're like, oh, well, you all should take care of yourselves, but I'm going to work myself to the bone. They'll get that message regardless. All right. We've got one question from the Q&A. So it says, Jim mentioned the scaling of the infrastructure, alerting, and monitoring. This is a company investment, no doubt. How do we embrace the change to the people who do not want the change and are comfortable working on the smaller scale? Jim, this was, I guess you mentioned it.
Right, yeah. So I'm interpreting this question as, hey, this is someone who's on board a company that's moving really fast and growing an awful lot and feeling uncomfortable with the situation that they've found themselves within. And so there's one thing that I think probably should be acknowledged. There's sort of stage fit that we should all recognize, that there are people who are going to be more comfortable at a smaller stage, and then the company, if it's successful, is going to grow, and it may not be the place for them anymore just because of the way the roles are changing. So there isn't a lot you can do about that, but I think there are things you can do in terms of trying to make sure that some of the attributes of a smaller company are maintained as you get bigger. And I keep going back to making sure that you have high agency teams where the people on that team, they know the mission, they're invested in it, and they have the ability to kind of decide how it is at that local level they're doing their work and engaging with it. And hopefully that will enable them to strike the balance between, hey, I'm in a big company, but still I have some control over how my work is being done day to day.
Great. Well, thank you everyone for all the insights in today's panel. We'll end there to end on time, make sure everyone gets to go to their next meeting on time. But the panelists and I will be heading over to the scaling channel, and we'll make sure to answer the other question that was posted in the Q&A and any other questions that you all have as well.